Hello and welcome to VHTB, your guide to the talent, culture, and finance side of the space startup ecosystem. My name is Justus Kilian, and I'm a partner at Space Capital. We focus on early stage venture investing in the space economy. Today, I'm joined by Matt Gjertsen from Better Everyday Studios.
Hello.
Hey, hey. And Brian Mejeur from AdAstra Talent Advisors. How are you, Brian?
Doing great.
Okay, so we're moving on in this sort of three-part series based on feedback from our listeners that was really process-oriented. And so today I'm focusing on driving the conversation in the fundraising process. There really is a disciplined way that you can sort of go about fundraising that will significantly impact the quality of your outcome. And so there's a structure. I've got this sort of broken into two parts. There is a structure based on a timeline about what you can do and some very specific tasks, tactics based on time. And then there is a set of sort of common missteps and best practices to hopefully accelerate everything. So those two parts are where we're going to dive in today and hopefully give you some really practical insights. So I'm just going to kick it off by saying this isn't necessarily tailored for like a seed stage company or pre-seed. It's more for like early stage broadly. So some of this stuff may need to be tailored for your organization, but I'm going to try to give you tactics that apply to everything. So I'd say the first place we're starting is really around the timeline. And I think a lot of folks expect that they're just going to start a fundraise and then go run that fundraise for 3 to 6 months until they've raised their capital. The deeper truth here is that actually the majority of the work for a successful fundraise starts 9 months ahead of when you actually want to go and initially formally kick that process off. And so the prep work that is required actually is what sets you up for success. And so that's what I'm going to dive into. So step one, 9 months before fundraising, kickoff date. It really is about, so if you are a little bit more formalized, it's about going to the board, seeking their formal approval, getting insights, identifying key financial and operating milestones, everybody thinks are critical to the next fundraise and what investors are going to want to see. It's going to include conducting a legal and financial review of your internal documents to ensure proper governance, avoid red flags that could trip you up down the line. And it really is about actually building a team that's going to support the fundraise itself. So who are those people? The CEO is certainly one. The CTO is often very, very important in that process. But what other members of the team should be expected to be pulled into the fundraising process to support as people go deeper in diligence or to support initial calls? How much of their day-to-day should they expect? Just setting those expectations with the team so they can continue to carry on with their responsibilities, but also know that they're going to be supporting this process as it comes up. So I'll pause there. You guys, anything, jump out real quick based on the context in this first milestone?
I'll just say a phrase that leaps out to me that I hear all the time in the networking space of dig the well before you're thirsty. Right? It's like the best time to look for a job is when you already still have a job, all those things. The work always ends up being the thing that you're trying to achieve always goes better if you do that prep work ahead of time. There's so many examples of that. I think this makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think what I'm most curious about is I think some of these things can feel obvious, and if you have a great advisory board, a great general board, it can be not too challenging. But like if you're newer to this or don't have all those people around you yet, what are some of those key milestones that you think investors are looking at? Like if you get to kick off the fundraise and you're looking back, you're like, oh, I'm really glad we defined these milestones that we were targeting to hit. I'm sure it's going to vary a lot, like company to company, but like, what are some of the key like buckets that you want to see people like?
I'll just make it as simple as I can for like the early stage companies. Yeah. Pre-seed, this is like first capital into the company. It really is just about the people. There'll be an idea to it, but there's a sort of a fragment of an idea where the company's going. So, do you believe that these people are exceptional and are sort of tracking to the right idea? Seed, you actually want to see something built, hardware, software, something material. Ideally, that is getting in the hands of some customers and there is some feedback that you can validate in some meaningful way. Then very much the team. The team is a little bit more built out. What have they done in the past? How good are they? How are they coalescing? Are there critical gaps on the team? So a seed, you're able to get a little bit more clarity around that. Series A now is like, hey, we built this thing or we're progressing towards this thing. We need to show material willingness to pay for this thing. And material used to be around $1 million. In the enterprise SaaS world, that was a recurring revenue. In deep tech, it's a variety of SIBRs and things like that, contract prepayments, NREs. That bar has shifted up. So I would actually say for Series A now, it's anywhere between 2 and 5 million is really what investors are expecting. And so as a result, you're seeing like pre-seed rounds get larger, seed rounds get larger to sort of like create that buffer.
Great. And when you mention each of these stages, this is what you want to see completed when you're going to raise that round.
These are just, the basic strokes. Every company will have then very specific needs, but, at the end of the day, investors can invest across a broad variety of companies. And so they are going to compare on sort of these specific things, the depth of the team and what they've done, the quality of the product and what customers are saying about it and how much, they enjoy it and like it. Yeah.
Perfect.
Tell me what you think about this, Justus, because I just remember years ago listening to Mark Randolph, the first CEO of Netflix, talk about how for every round, you should be able to clearly state what question you are answering with this money. And like the early rounds are like, so like pre-money or something, or pre-seed, it's like, will anybody work with me? And then it's like, that's like one. And then, can I build something? Will anybody buy it? I love that phrase of just like every round, you should be able to clearly say like, what questions are you answering with this money?
I love that rephrasing. That's a perfect example of somebody who like isn't in this process day to day. They could just like simplify it down into that. Yeah. I mean, I think what you identified there are like perfect simplifiers. Like, can you actually convince people to work with you and get behind your vision? Can you actually convince customers that you've met their needs and like they should take you as credible? Are there enough of those customers out there who repeatedly want to engage with you? And you hit those milestones and the ball really starts to roll at that point. But those are essentially what we're defining is what's called product market fit. The team actually built for the market. But yeah, I love that.
And what we're describing here sounds similar, but maybe not exactly the same as when you're going for the fundraise. Are you looking back and saying, did they achieve what they said they were going to achieve? Like how interested are you in like answering that question versus like the definitions you gave for what you're loosely targeting? Does that question make sense?
So that becomes more important at later stage, particularly when companies are like getting a grasp on an understanding of their financials. So if you said you were going to hit $1 million in, revenue in 6 months, did you actually do that? Like, do you understand the business well enough to project your revenues and are these numbers credible? So then I could say, that 10 million that you're projecting to hit in a year, like, you understand your customer well enough and you understand your business well enough to actually like realize that. So that's why it becomes important later stage. At the earlier stages, I think there can be a lot of exogenous factors that sort of can like slow things down and so that's why it really is an accumulation of talent and an accumulation of quality engagement from customers, driving towards commercialization. And a lot of investors probably in all reality don't take that time series analysis. They're sort of interested in a thing or a company at a fixed point in time, and then they go on to the next thing.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, so we hit 9 months. We're now progressing to 6 months before your fundraise. This is when you kick off your pitch deck. It's a time-sensitive process or a time-intensive process. It could take anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks to sort of simplify the narrative. That's the most important thing, like finding a simple through line. You want to work with your existing investors to systematically surface 10 to 15 burning questions, sticking points that those investors have. So you can pre-develop responses to those issues. You want to build your initial target list of potential investors and identify existing relationships that can help you do sort of warm intros. And then you want to, start to connect with your target investor contacts before the official fundraise begins. Because like Matt said, the best time to raise is when you're not actually raising. And so, it is a relationship game. You want to start those conversations. You can let people know you're going out to market in 6 months, but hey, sure, I'll entertain this conversation. You're not really taking money now. And, you just love feedback. Investors like that, it sort of makes you feel a little bit special. So that's T minus, 6 months. Again, we're all in the prep phase. You're not really actually fundraising yet. Any thoughts here?
I'm getting vibes of almost like early, like as a startup or as a new business or new product launch. One of the things that I would hear a lot is, if I'm building a workshop, go reach out to potential customers and ask for their feedback before you're even selling the workshop, kind of thing. And then you get good feedback, but also like they feel like a little bit of connection into that. So I'm guessing some of these early reach outs where you're getting feedback before there's money, it's just you're doing anything you can to kind of like strengthen that connection between you and that potential investor.
Yeah, I would say they're often informal conversations. Like you're not going to bring that deck to the conversation, but you're going to tease parts of the narrative. Because, it is also true that you don't get multiple shots, to officially pitch and ask for money. So it is, I would frame this as relationship building, engaging, telling what you're doing, getting to know each other, seeing if there's a fit. And also trying to learn a little bit about what they're looking for. Are they going to be deploying capital in the next 6 months? What are, their top priorities? So, it's a little bit of a conversation, get to know each other.
And then if you're one of those companies that people are really excited about and they want to throw money at you at this stage, do you take it?
So this is what's called a preempted term sheet. And, basically you found a great match. They don't need to see the whole deck. They don't need to see everything. They believe in what you're doing. And you don't even have to raise the round. It came together and, it was just magic in heaven. That is the best case you could have for a fundraising outcome, the easiest possible world. That doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it's magic. So that's why you run this process, right? It creates an on-ramp for that type of engagement to happen.
I feel like I have a friend who just had that happen at their company, but I can't remember what it was. It was like, he said exactly what you just said, of just like, they weren't officially raising money, but like an opportunity popped up or something. Yep. So it happens.
Yeah. And so the best way to do that is to sort of time it maybe with like a key hire, a big contract, something, because, it's like, hey, we just had something actually quite exciting. I'd love to tell you about it, So those are some of the tactics. You don't want to just have a conversation where there's nothing to talk about. So the updates are, important. You want to make sure that you're showing milestones, showing progress, showing acceleration, because the secret to all of this is creating urgency and scarcity. And the deepest way to do that is a little bit of FOMO. So, that's sort of the magic that happens in this process. Urgency and scarcity, that's what we're building to. If you preempt a term sheet, that means like the round's already happening. It's moving super quick. Everybody better get on the bandwagon and fill this thing out. Like it's moving before anybody expected it. So very urgent, very scarce, right? Okay, let's keep moving. 3 months before fundraising. This is actually when I begin actually like recommending you typically target some key investors. And so you're actually thinking about building like your investor list in like some sort of collaborative database across waves. And so this would be like your phase 1 of investors. It would be a mix of like maybe 2 of your top priority investors that you're really excited about, that you've been building a relationship with, and then maybe 5 or 6 of these other investors that are just curious about what you've been doing. Maybe they don't bring a lot of alignment or value, but they're practice for you. And so, I would dedicate 3 to 4 weeks for, this period of time to actually try to progress not only your narrative, but, in this case, you will actually have a deck. You will be able to talk through it. You will be able to get some feedback and iterate. So you're improving your pitch before you formally want to offer. And, this is when you could actually get, a term sheet because you are more formally pitching, but it's still, you haven't kicked it off officially. So Any thoughts there, or should we keep moving?
Keep moving.
Okay.
Keep moving. Yeah.
Formal fundraise, 3 to 6 months process. This is what typically people think. So you're now on to your second wave of target investors. This is where you're now rotating much more heavily into the people that you're excited about. Okay. Hopefully you've generated some folks that have already wanted to commit to your round. Maybe you already have a term sheet that you've received. And so when you're going out, again, this is, trying to move the process along as fast as you possibly can. There is some sort of urgency happening or some sort of scarcity happening. So it's like, hey, really excited to reach out to you for these reasons. We already have a number of investors that have proactively reached out to us, but we want to talk to you, right? We want to talk to you for these reasons. And you're creating sort of an opportunity and an environment for them to, get involved, even though this is already moving and, you weren't really planning on it. So again, we're now driving it to this sort of formal process. The last thing in this is actually then closing the round. And I think a lot of founders underestimate how hard it can be to actually get the round closed. And so it's important, once you have that term sheet, to realize that it's probably going to take a month for a priced round to actually close. And there's going to be a lot of points to negotiate. You want to have very credible lawyers here, because raising money is a legal process at the end of the day. And so you're going to be negotiating key points. You want people who have a pulse on the state of the market, not somebody who's just generally done legal advice and maybe some mergers and acquisitions or something. They're just not going to have a pulse on what the terms are, and it can throw your whole raise off. So quality counsel, over a month to close. Make sure that you're sort of ready to thoughtfully negotiate, compromise, but and listen to your lawyers. So that is the process. Any takeaways? My biggest takeaway from the process is 3/4 of the effort is before you formally kick off. And really the 1/4 of officially pitching is ideally as driving as fast as you can to a term sheet and then thoughtfully managing the closing process. And I think that's the complete inverse of what most founders think fundraising is.
Yeah.
Well, I would guess that, if you don't do that early stuff, then you do your formal launch and realize there's things you still have to figure out. And that's probably what kills any of that kind of urgency and scarcity, is the moment you start to slow the process down.
Yeah. When you're reaching out to these VCs, especially once you've really kicked off the process, what does that outreach? What's the most effective style of outreach in that? Are you leading with the team? Are you leading with a teaser of the product? Are you sending a lot of details on what's the best way to kind of get someone on the phone? What's the right amount of information to share?
Well, the easiest way to say that is to not hire a banker and have them reach out on your behalf. It should be led by a CEO of the company at the early stage. And ideally, you're leveraging your relationships to get warm introductions. And the warm introductions, should ideally have two things. One, why this firm should even be interested. Hopefully your warm introer has done some level of pre-vetting, or the company has done some level of pre-vetting. And that's, key to, the prep process is why do we like this investor? Do they just have a big balance sheet? Do they just have a big brand name? Or do they have a deep domain knowledge? Are they a small fund and they're more strategically aligned with our incentives? Will be a bigger portion of their fund. So think about why you want to reach out to them and, compliment them and tell them why you like them and why you think they'd be a good fit. That's the best intro. And then you use the pitch for explaining the details, but you give them a little bit of a sense of what you're doing, and you flatter them as much as you can.
Love it. I have one more question I'm really curious to get your thoughts on. We've been hearing some rumblings of different things that VCs may or may not do that are shady, we'll just say. What insights do you have into that? And arguably most importantly, how do founders keep an eye out and protect themselves from bad actors?
Yeah. So I think one of the most important best practices that every founder should apply is when they're actually having conversations with the VC, they should ask explicitly, what is the size of your fund? How far are you into the deployment cycle? What is your follow-on strategy? Importantly, how do you make decisions? Is it as a consensus? Is it individually? Like, is this person the decision maker, or does somebody else need to make the decision? And who did you actually take capital from? They're probably not going to give you the exact names of their LPs, but what countries are they raising capital from? Do those align with your potential interests? So that is just one standard best practice that you should do. It shows a maturity and a sophistication in your fundraising process. And if you have that level of detail, you can filter out potential red flags and also more thoughtfully manage your effort through their process. The second one, which is way more tailored to what you're saying, is there are a number of tactics that investors and frankly founders can employ throughout the life cycle of a company to take advantage or capture more of the value or sort of manipulate a transaction. I think if there was just a simple way to sort of boil this down, the legal representation that you choose really should be a larger firm that does many transactions frequently and you work closely with them and make sure that you read, the documents in detail so you understand what you're doing. Ask for details on, accelerated triggers, investing, and all of these things. Understand what they are. Understand what's market standard and where there's deviations from that. There are pretty good standards on what that actually looks like from a legal standpoint. So the NVCA puts out standard documents, and if you're not working from NVCA, that is very off market. So that's all an immediate red flag. You should always be starting from NVCA and then adapting, here and there to sort of negotiate. So those are some very simple practices. It can get very, very company specific around, round dynamics I'll give you one example, a large firm coming in and taking a whole round. Well, now, you, company A, are dependent on that investor. And you don't have a syndicate of investors or a broader set of investors on your cap table should you hit a roadblock, right? And if you need to go back and ask for additional capital, they have all the leverage. They're the only people on your cap table, right? And so you've now created sort of a imbalance in power dynamics that investors can and likely will take advantage of, so they'll maybe want warrants, or maybe they'll, want some sort of discount or something like that to incentivize them for the risk. And so, there's ways to manage that. There's hundreds of them. And that's where the art of sort of doing these deals over time becomes valuable, and where your counsel can be really valuable.
Wow. That was so helpful. Thank you so much.
Well, I think there actually are a long list of best practices, and maybe I'll need to save that for another conversation. I think we've covered a lot of really, really important topics here. So I don't know that we should go and rehash, the others. Just to recap, fundraising is a process that you control. If you manage that process thoughtfully, it will generate better outcomes raising capital. The two things that you're trying to achieve in the process is an urgency and a scarcity in the round. And 3/4 of the prep is up front, and the 1/4 that really is around formal fundraising is really getting to a term sheet, making sure that, you have great counsel to help you sort of negotiate those finer details and protect yourself and arrive at a market-based transaction that is sort of amicable on both sides. So if you do that, you're going to be light years ahead of the vast majority of if you do that, you're going to be
incredible.
Awesome.